governments in England, I mean, in the United States, and it's the same all over the Western world, for those that don't know, you have the federal government, you have the state governments, and cities and counties and local municipalities are chartered through the state constitution. So this is a form of rebellion to have Schwarzenegger saying, we're going to go to cities to have them begin the looting and the rendering of booty to the international organizations. We have the UN, just as they've gone into the universities and taken them over, actively trying to take over our communities, and we need to rout them out. That's my only point.
Right, and you're quite right. And the way to do that is to make sure that any state or local organization that oversteps its powers is taken to court under the ultra vires rule. That means anything that is beyond your powers, ultra vires in Latin, that's the court phrase. You aren't allowed to do that. And it is not permissible for local administration to levy federal taxes. So if they try to start playing that game, all it takes is one good citizen to take them to court, to the federal court, and say, look, this is not allowed, is it? The federal court will look at it and say, no, it isn't. And they will impose whatever penalties are necessary, whatever orders of the court are necessary, to stop the local administration doing this. So you do still have a constitution in the United States that basically works. And if anyone, like the EPA or local government or state government, try to overtop the rights of the U.S. legislature to make and unmake the laws that you elected them to make and unmake, then you will be defending your democracy if you take them to court and say, we will not have this imposed upon us. We are doing this in the UK all the time because we recently had our local government trying to impose some damn fool tax on us. And they said they had the right to do this under some European directive or another. And we said, no, you don't have the right to do that to us, and we are not paying. And if you try to make us pay, we will take you to court. And they were so frightened that they said, okay, we'll leave you alone and we won't.
So clearly, when you stand up and fight to this illegal strategy, they fold. But the question is, will we stand and fight? Now, I want to get into strategy. In layman's terms, you're probably the leading expert in the world, not just on the science from studying it and interviewing all the scientists, but on how their fraud works, how their organization works, how their propaganda works, how their bureaucracy, their takeover by stealth works. Specifically, Lord Christopher Monckton, joining us live in the final days, the climax of the summit tomorrow into next week. Specifically, you're saying that they are going to get an agreement. It's going to be a stealth agreement. Explain that to us and what you expect to happen tomorrow with Obama and what we can do understanding their cloaked attack profile.
Right. The first thing they will do, and the one thing that I think they were always going to succeed in doing at this conference, is to agree to establish what will be delicately called the institutional framework. Now, that is a code word for world government. They're no longer calling it world government because they tried that, I spotted it, I publicized it, the world went, we're not having that. And so they're beaten off from using the word, but they're going to keep the structure. They're going to use this conference, the agreement that they will reach here, to set up the institutional framework, which means, in effect, the world government, and they're going to take from the Western countries the very large financial resources required to do that. That's the one thing they are definitely going to succeed in doing here, and they will announce that as a victory in itself, and they will be right, because that is the one and only single aim of this entire global warming nonsense. It is to establish the mechanisms, the structure, and, above all, the funding for a world government. And that is what they're going to get agreement for. And they will disguise it by saying we're setting up a $10 billion fund or a $100 billion fund for adaptation to climate change in third world countries. But actually, this money will almost all be gobbled up by the international bureaucracy. And because of the way that governments now hide from their people how it is they're spending the people's money and exactly how much is going to international organizations. When I had a question put down in the House of Lords about how much Britain had given to the UN's climate panel over the years, The answer I got was, we do not have this information. Well, of course they have the information, but they're not going to tell us. And the difficulty will be in finding out what they are actually doing. But if they declare that they are going to do this, and they don't have the constitutional authority to do it, and that will certainly be the case in the United States, then it is possible for you in the United States to fight it and stop them paying the money to this organization, unless it can be shown that they have the constitutional authority to do it. And
absolutely, Lord Monckton.
They don't have that constitutional authority unless this is a treaty and unless it is ratified by the Senate. So I think that with luck, anything that comes out in just the form of a constitutional of an executive agreement will be something which you can overthrow and defeat and say no to. Even though the Supreme Court will bend over backwards to do what Obama wants, in the end it does have to uphold the Constitution, and it can't, I think, countenance the circumvention of the Constitution by the executive agreement procedure on a treaty with such major financial and political implications as this.
Okay, Lord Christopher Monckton, again, sorry to be interrupting, but I want to move into some other areas and get your expertise on them. I want to play a short clip. This is a story up on prisonplanet.com, Infowars.net. Steve Watson out of the UK wrote it. Rothschild talks about the difficulty of global government's agenda at Copenhagen. So he talks about the difficulty of selling this. So I want to play the clip and then ask you, Lord Monckton, why did they deny world government for so long when it was in their own documents? Then they came out in the last couple months and admitted, okay, it's global government run by private groups. And then now they're retreating from that but still pushing the agenda. It appears on the surface that they are really beginning to show real signs of stress and that this is a mortal wound, that ClimateGate is literally hemorrhaging all of their support. But here is the short clip.
Yeah. It's past the point of talking. We know historically that the global governance the sort of agenda to these issues is very hard to try and, with all the best intentions, it's very hard to actually activate. We're seeing that right now. We're seeing a lot of fragmentation going on in Copenhagen, a lot of different agendas pulling in different directions. And I think what we really need to see is people on the ground starting to actually act upon the low-hanging fruit and start to try and move on the solutions that we have at hand.
Okay, so that's the headline, Rothschild Ruse, Difficulty of Advancing Global Governance Agenda at Copenhagen. That was on Bloomberg Television. Lord Monckton.
Yeah, I think he's right. I think they are finding it difficult because they got caught out. You see, let's remember how they hid this treaty with the word government in it. What they did was they put it on the website of the Conference of States Parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change, but they called it a note by the Secretariat, and it was only a vigilant friend of mine who realized it was too large to be just a note by the Secretariat, too big a file. He opened it and found this treaty buried at the back of the note, 186 pages at the back of a two-page note. And there, in it, when I read it, was this business in Annex 1 at paragraph 36 to 38 about a world government that was going to take over all the financial and other markets. There'll be no such thing as a free market anymore. Lavish taxation, etc., huge powers. Never had any government worldwide had such powers as this was going to have. And they got caught out. They had hoped they could leave it there. And then when they got this through at Copenhagen and people started objecting, saying, we hadn't realized it meant this, they would have said, but it was on our website all the time. That was the cheesy game they were trying to play, and they didn't get away with it. Because it was publicized and because, particularly in the United States, people stood up and got in touch with their legislators and said, we are not having this. This treaty shall not pass. It became really impossible for them to get away with it in the way that they had originally hoped. They still hoped that by making it an agreement, by taking out the word government, but by leaving in all the institutional framework, which is what they're now calling the world government, they might still get away with it. And now what Rothschild is saying is even that is proving problematic because there are so many pressures, particularly from ordinary American citizens, getting in touch with their legislators, using their last few days of democracy and freedom to fight to keep it that way. That is what, above all else, has helped derail.
What is the low-lying fruit he's talking about? Is that what you're discussing of how they're going to do this by stealth through the bureaucracy and through just getting national governments to just give tax money to this body like they've been doing in the past?
That's right. What they'll do is they'll start with the institutional framework. This is the world government structure, because that doesn't require any agreement about how much the Western countries will pay towards the poor countries, how much money the poor countries will get, how much CO2 emissions Western countries will have to reduce, ditto, ditto. All of that difficult stuff they won't do. They will do the easy bit, and the easy bit, bureaucratically, is always agree to set up a bureaucracy. All bureaucracies are very good at setting up new bureaucracies. So that's what he means by low-hanging fruit. He means let's set up the world government. And that's what they're going to do. And I think that's the one outcome which is more or less guaranteed from tomorrow's final negotiations. And this conference is actually due to end tomorrow.